Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are completely reframing how you approach your education. We're going to take those passive, time-wasting study habits and transform them into a powerful, personalized, and honestly, a highly efficient system. So, if you've ever felt like you're working way harder than your grades actually show, well, you are in exactly the right place to start effective learning. Let's just dive right in and address that universally frustrating pain point. You know the one, grinding for 8, maybe 10 hours straight, totally sacrificing your sleep, your hobbies, your social life, only to bomb the test because absolutely nothing stuck. Seriously, why does this happen to so many of us? Well, it happens because we fundamentally misunderstand what studying actually is. We've got to separate the two. Look, studying is just a physical action you perform. It's the way you drag a highlighter across a page or copy down notes. But learning is the actual neurological outcome. It's that magical process where your brain connects the dots, allowing you to retain, understand, and actually apply that information later. So if you spend 10 hours performing the physical act of studying, but you don't achieve that neurological outcome, you didn't learn. You literally just exercised your highlighter. So if we want to get serious about this, we need to ditch the quick hacks and start building a real system. And to build that system, we have to tear down some major myths, starting with the idea that you can just copy whatever the top student in your class is doing. That almost always fails, and here's why. Everyone has different natural levels of deep processing. Deep processing is just your brain's ability to extract meaningful learning from what you consume. Copying a top student, it's kind of like being in a standard commuter car and trying to win a race by using the exact same pedal and steering movements as a pro driver in a supercar. They might just have a naturally more powerful engine for deep processing, which lets them get away with mediocre study techniques. You can't just copy their movements, right? You need to build your own engine. Which brings us to this brilliant analogy. You cannot build an entire house with just one premium screwdriver. You need an entire toolbox. Abusing just one tool, like, say, endlessly spamming flashcards for every single subject, is going to leave you exhausted and highly inefficient. You need a customized system of tools, not just a single hack. This leads us directly into a massive trap, something we call the illusion of learning. Have you ever spent, 3 hours making your notes look perfectly color-coded and neat? I mean, sure, your notes look like they belong in an art museum, but rewording and rewriting them is usually just productive procrastination. It's the illusion of learning. It feels super comfortable, it definitely feels like hard work, but when it comes to real retention and the ability to apply that knowledge on an exam, it yields practically zero results. We hide in this illusion because, frankly, it's easy and it's safe. To shatter that illusion, you've got to test yourself early and often, and you have to do it across different levels of knowledge. Step 1 is declarative knowledge. That's knowing the theory, the what. But step 2 is procedural knowledge, knowing the how, and actually executing the problem. Think about tennis, right? Reading a book about how to swing a racket is declarative, but stepping onto the court and adjusting your footing to actually hit a fast-moving ball, that's procedural. If you only test your theory but never practice the application, your system is completely broken. And that brings us to a really crucial point: how you handle the results of those tests. You've got to stop brushing off your errors as just silly mistakes. Listen to me. Silly mistake syndrome is a total myth that holds students back. If you consistently miss tiny details, you need to rigorously treat every single missed point as a genuine, legitimate gap in your understanding. You have to assume that if you really understood the concept deeply, you wouldn't have missed that detail in the first place. Now that we know how to spot those gaps, let's look at the absolute best way to fix them by upgrading your active recall. When we look at the hierarchy of active recall, open-ended free recall, like writing out an entire essay purely from memory, is vastly superior to everything else. Just below that is cued recall, which relies on a prompt, like your standard flashcard. But down at the very bottom, that's recognition. That's when you flip a flashcard, read the answer, and say to yourself, "Oh yeah, I knew that." No, you didn't. You just recognized it. Tricking yourself with mere recognition is the ultimate red flag in learning. And speaking of flashcards, while rote memorization is sometimes necessary as an absolute last resort for isolated facts, you really need to understand that it creates massive time debt. 1 minute spent today creating a flashcard equals about 5 minutes of future study debt tomorrow, because you have to review it over and over and over again. Spamming hundreds of flashcards a day isn't a sustainable system at all. It's just a fast track to burnout. Just look at the real-world impact of fixing this. Take Tony, a chemical materials student from Taiwan. He was caught in this brutal cycle of rote memorization, studying a grueling 60 hours a week. But by reducing his rote memorization volume by a mere 20%, he successfully halved his study time to just 30 hours a week. A tiny reduction in brute force memorization frees up a massive amount of time for actual high-level learning. You can accelerate this efficiency even further by teaming up with friends. But, and this is a big but, only if you do it properly. Don't just sit in a room distracting each other. Assign specific roles, keep time, and most importantly, create practice exams for one another entirely from memory. When you swap and grade those exams absolutely without using an answer key, it forces immense critical thinking and discussion. It's essentially an infinite practice paper glitch that exposes deep nuances you'd literally never find on your own. Okay, to truly level up this whole system, we need to talk about maximizing your cognitive load. We have to completely embrace the mental friction of true education. Real learning shouldn't feel effortless. But first, a quick rule for survival. If you are falling behind in your classes, don't just endlessly try to bail out the water of past assignments. It's like being in a sinking ship, guys. You have to plug the hole first. Stop accumulating new learning debt by studying ahead for your upcoming classes. Then, once the leak is plugged, you can safely chip away at the old backlog. And how exactly do you study ahead efficiently? You do it by scoping a subject before the lecture. Getting a massive, big-picture overview of the concepts primes your brain. It's a lot like learning the layout of a huge library before you try to shelve hundreds of random books. If you know where the empty shelves are beforehand, sorting the books becomes rapid and logical. If you don't, it's pure chaos. Give your brain the empty shelves first. Once you're primed, you have to engage. And remember, if your brain feels like it's falling asleep, getting bored, or just coasting, you're engaged in passive learning. Effective learning inherently requires high cognitive load. It should feel like hard, deliberate mental exertion. If it doesn't challenge your brain's processing power, your brain simply won't retain it. It's going to assume the information isn't important enough to waste precious energy on. A fantastic way to force this high cognitive load is by actively creating analogies. But don't just stop there. Once you make an analogy, like, say, life is a journey, ruthlessly critique its flaws. You might pause and say, well, life is super unpredictable, so it's actually more like a spontaneous journey through a foggy forest. By refining and expanding your analogies like that, you force your brain to grapple with the deep nuances of the material. It is an incredible workout for your mind. Building this premium toolbox definitely doesn't happen overnight, which brings us to our final essential tool, the learning log. Because it is biologically impossible for your brain to change dozens of habits all at once, you absolutely must keep a learning log. Document your trial and error. Write down what specific technique you're testing today, how it felt, and what you're going to tweak tomorrow. Tracking these targeted experiments keeps you systematically focused. Plus, looking back at your progress is going to provide massive motivation when the process feels a bit slow. Ultimately, it all comes down to a choice. You can choose the comforting illusion of passive studying, rewriting notes and highlighting until your hand literally cramps, feeling like a hard worker but getting nowhere. Or you can choose the high-leverage reality of active, effective learning. Yes, it requires way more mental friction up front, but it results in true mastery, vastly superior retention, and honestly, a lot more free time. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. If you were to brutally and honestly audit your own study habits tonight, how much of your current routine is just productive procrastination? How much would you need to absolutely delete to finally start effective learning? Really think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.